you might be thinking, yeah, so we're going to be bondservants for Christ. It's like, oh, okay. Bondservants, who used to be slaves to something, and now they're voluntary slaves for another. Well, what did we used to be slaves to? Did you guys know that we used to be slaves? Turn to Romans chapter 6, and you might be thinking right now, slaves to what, man? I've never been a slave in my life. Well, let me tell you, we were all once slaves. And we find out what? In Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. And we'll start in verse 6. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin, or slaves of sin. So, it says you're a slave to whatever you serve. Now, before we came to Christ, we didn't know anything else but sin. We served sin because sin was presented in front of us and we would just do it. It's like all we ever knew, And God has brought us out of that through Jesus Christ. So we're slaves to something else. Bondservants of God, yes, but read along with me in verse 16, and we'll see how we can be slaves to something else. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slave to whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death, or obedience leading to righteousness? But God be thanked, that though you were slaves to sin, yet you obey from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered, and having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. So we become slaves of righteousness now by being obedient to God, and we can serve Him rather than sin, which is a lot more fun. Well, sin is pleasurable for a season, but then you reap the corruption, and it's no fun after that. Now, Ephesians 2 tells us that we were under the dominion of Satan, that we used to formerly walk according to the course of this world, according to the prince and the power of the air, which is speaking of Satan. And we've been called out of that bondage, that slavery to sin, into God's dominion, into the kingdom of righteousness. So we learn how we can be a servant to God, a slave or a bond servant. Well, how can we serve God? Well, in Acts chapter 3, Jesus is called God's servant. God's servant, Jesus Christ. Well, how did he serve God? Can someone answer the question, how exactly did Jesus serve God? What?
By serving others?
Exactly. By serving others. That was great. Usually when I teach the junior high students that, I ask them a question, what's the second book of the Bible? And, what? Finally they get the question. Is that Luke? No, Mark. Matthew, Mark, right? They're like, oh, okay. Maybe kids only got the New Testament. But, okay. Well, Jesus served God by serving others. And he gave us the two greatest commandments. That the entire law and prophets rest on these two commandments. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, and then love others, your neighbor as yourself. So love God and love others. So yeah, we love God, and we can serve God, but how exactly am I going to serve God? I mean, he's not right in front of me, like, here, I'll do this, I'll do that. Yeah, okay. But the way Jesus served God was through the serving of others. even sacrificing for others. So love God and love your neighbor. What does that look like exactly, serving others? Well, 2 Timothy 2:4, I'll read it to you, or you can turn there with me. 2 Timothy chapter 2.